So, here's the question for today. What if everything actually clicks for the Chargers this year? I'm talking about a legitimate step forward. Not hype, not projections, but actual overachievement. The kind of season where expectations get surpassed, not just met. So I'm going to talk about how this team could exceed expectation. How could they actually take that next step? And trust me, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. There's nuance here. But let's start with the biggest and clearest reason why the Chargers could overachieve. What's up, Chargers fans? Welcome to the NFL Playbook Chargers. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. This channel is all about breaking down everything you need to know about the Bolts. Last year, this team's run game was a mess. J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards both finished in the bottom 12 for rushing yards over expectation. And if you were watching the games, that wasn't a surprise. It wasn't explosive. It wasn't efficient. It was one-dimensional. Even when the stats made it look like they were producing, the actual down-to-down effectiveness wasn't there. This year, though, there's a legitimate reason to believe that changes. The Chargers went out and got Najee Harris, and while I wasn't in love with that signing when it first happened, I have to acknowledge this. In a gap-heavy scheme, Najee has historically been better. His yards over expectation numbers in those setups hover around 40%, which puts him near the top 15 in the league. That's a massive step up from where Edwards was last season. You're not going to get a ton of breakaway runs with Najee, but you're going to get consistency. You're going to get physicality. And you're going to get positive gains more often than not. Then you add in Omarion Hampton, who is just a flat-out better version of what Dobbins gave them last season. He's younger, more dynamic, and a better fit stylistically with what Greg Roman wants to do. Those two guys, Harris and Hampton, give the Chargers a much stronger backfield than they had last year. Maybe not flashy, but functional. And for once, maybe even reliable. And let's not overlook the offensive line in all of this, because the Chargers didn't just change the backfield, they went out and got Mekhi Becton at guard and Joe Alt entering year 2. That's a big deal. Last year, this offense basically refused to run to the right side of the line. They didn't trust it. They didn't even try. That kind of predictability kills a run game. But now, with Becton solidifying the right guard spot and Alt progressing physically, that right side becomes usable. You're not stuck running behind Rashawn Slater and Zion Johnson on every single play. The playbook opens up. And when the defense can't key in on one side, your offense starts to look a whole lot more balanced. And yeah, while we're on the topic of Zion, the shift to center could end up being a quiet win. Zion's one of the strongest run blockers on the team, and having his athleticism at center, especially on plays where they're pulling or trying to reach the second level, could be huge. Bradley Bozeman, sliding in at guard, gives them some size, but it's Zion who brings the explosiveness. That's a trade-off I can live with. So that's the run game. Much more promising than last year, and possibly the #1 reason to believe this offense can take a leap. But it's not just about the run game. It's about the weapons, too. Let's talk about how this group has been upgraded across the board. At tight end position, Tyler Conklin changes everything. No disrespect to Hayden Hurst or Stone Smart, but the fact is, Justin Herbert didn't trust those guys. They weren't reliable. They didn't have consistent hands. They weren't consistent separators. And in Greg Roman's system, where tight ends are used often and creatively, that matters. Conklin has had one drop over the last 2 seasons. One. That's the kind of guy you can lean on in the red zone. That's the guy you can trust on 3rd and 6. And if you're pairing him with Will Dissly, now you've got a duo that can block, catch, and stretch the field from tight alignments. You've got actual flexibility in your formations now. Last year, the Chargers were throwing backup fullbacks and tight ends with no pedigree because they had no one else. Now, they've got a real room, and I'd argue it's the most improved position group on the roster. Then you look at receiver. Last year's X-receiver situation was non-existent. They tried to piece it together with Joshua Palmer and Quentin Johnston, but that's not their game. Neither of them is a true X. Now, they've added Mike Williams and Trey Harris. Even if Mike is just a situational guy, having a real vertical threat on the outside changes the way defenses play you. Trey Harris, we're going to see what he becomes, but everything we've heard about him screams ready to contribute now. So, in terms of personnel, this offense has taken a step forward. You don't have to reinvent the scheme. You don't need to ask Herbert to do Superman things every week. You just need efficiency, and they're finally built to deliver that. Speaking of Herbert, let's talk about what Greg Roman actually has to work with now. I mentioned the EPA per play numbers, top 12 in passing efficiency last year. That's with a bare-bones receiving core, an ineffective run game, and a tight end group that was nearly invisible. Herbert has been putting up respectable numbers in a broken system. Now that he's got some stability, he could actually hit another level. That doesn't mean an MVP season, but it could mean a 10 or 11 win campaign, where he plays clean football, converts red zone opportunities, and limits the hits he takes. That's not about talent, that's about infrastructure. And it's finally starting to look like the Chargers have built one. Defensively, this team also has a lot going for it, especially when you talk about Derwin James and his role under Jesse Minter. Last year, Derwin played nearly 300 snaps in the slot over the second half of the season, and guess what? He was elite. PFF had him as the highest graded DB in that stretch. Minter figured it out. You don't put Derwin 20 yards deep. You put him around the football. You let him hit. You let him blitz. You let him cover tight ends, and in year 2 of this system, that role is only going to expand. The safety room around him? Legit. Elijah Molden has turned into a real player. Alohi Gilman is back and healthy. They've got Tony Jefferson, RJ Mickens, even some camp bodies who can contribute. For once, it's not Derwin and a bunch of question marks. It's Derwin and a group of guys who actually know how to play the position. And that gives Minter so much more flexibility as a play caller. And speaking of Minter, don't be surprised if we see a much more aggressive version of him this season. At Michigan, he blitzed over 40% of the time. Last year with the Chargers, just 23%. That's not his DNA. That was caution, protecting a weak corner room. But now, with Cam Hart, Dante Jackson, and a more developed secondary, expect that blitz rate to climb. Expect more man coverage. Expect this defense to attack more. And finally generate some negative plays. Now, I know a lot of people are still worried about the interior defensive line. No more Puna for it. Not a ton of proven talent. But here's the thing. They didn't really have proven talent last year either. And Mike Elston turned that group into one of the league's most consistent run defenses. Then there's Daiyan Henley. Let's be real. This guy is a star in the making. He played through a torn labrum last year and still flashed insane range and leadership. This year, he's healthy, vocal, and by all accounts, taking on a leadership role even with veterans like Derwin still on the roster. If you're looking for someone to anchor the middle of this defense for the next 5 years, it's Henley. You can book that now. Okay, now, here's another big question. What does overachievement actually look like? It's not going 10-7. That's baseline expectation. That's the Vegas win total. To truly overachieve, this team has to win a playoff game, maybe even 2. If they go on the road and beat Buffalo, Baltimore, or Kansas City in the playoffs, that's overachieving. That's validation. That's proof that this new regime is actually building something sustainable. Winning the division would qualify too. Beating the Chiefs, finally getting that monkey off their back. Yeah, I'd call that an overachievement, especially with how deep the AFC is. But if we're talking true next-level success, it's a trip to the AFC Championship. That's the bar. That's where we can say definitively, this worked. And honestly, it's not out of reach.